Well, welcome to another Friday night. And tonight I want to start a new series. And it's one I've been giving some thought to for quite a while now. And it's about helping people who are in addiction or with trauma. So trauma, complex trauma, or CPTSD as it is often known. I get questions all the time about this topic. And what I have found over my 30 years of working in counseling and helping people with trauma, and particularly in the last 15 years, we're specialized in that area. What I've realized is that many people want to help others who have trauma or addiction, and they come with the best of intentions, but it's so easy to do the wrong thing. It's so easy to not carry out your best intentions in the best way. And there's two common ways that we tend to go wrong when we are trying to help others. The first is what I want to talk about tonight, and that is we give until we burn out. And so that is called, and it goes by different names today. Secondary traumatic stress is one title. So you deal with people who have trauma, you listen to their trauma, and you get traumatized, secondary trauma, as a result of working with traumatized people. Or vicarious trauma, it's called, or compassion fatigue. So that's a very common one we're going to look at. The second one, we're going to save it for a couple weeks, is enabling. So you want to help a person so badly that you try to do their recovery for them. And as a result, they don't have to learn the tools. They don't have to apply the tools. They don't have to grow up. Or you so badly want them to be happy and to like you that you clean up their mess so that they don't experience the consequences of their decisions. Both are so easy to fall into. Let me begin by just talking about a definition of this secondary traumatic stress. So it's written this way. Secondary traumatic stress is the emotional duress that results when an individual hears about or watches the firsthand trauma experiences of another. Now, what is interesting to me is I did research on this, is that studies show that 6% to 26% of therapists working with a traumatized population end up with secondary traumatic stress. So up to a quarter of therapists develop secondary traumatic stress. When it comes to child welfare workers, or CFS in Manitoba, up to 50% of child welfare workers have secondary traumatic stress. All therapists that work in this field are at high risk of secondary traumatic stress because you're just every day working in a traumatic environment. And so, for people who try to help others with addiction or trauma, you enter a field that is potentially very dangerous. And it can do a lot of damage to you if you're not prepared. So that's why I want to do this series. Now, some people might think, okay, I can see that a therapist who's been in the field for years could eventually burn out. And that's how you would kind of picture secondary traumatic stress happening. But what research is showing is that even young therapists, new in their career, can get it in a short period of time. So this is not just a malady for seasoned older therapists. This can happen to anybody who is in this field. So another way that we talk about it is it begins to show itself by what is called emotional fatigue or emotional overload. Or another way to say that is a therapist, when he gets into the field of working with people with trauma or addiction, has tremendous amounts of empathy for these people. Their heart is just moved. They can cry sometimes with these people. That's how much empathy they have. But once secondary traumatic stress begins to happen, or compassion fatigue, what begins to happen is you start to dislike these people. You kind of harden yourself and have a callous, distant attitude to these people because you just start to perceive them as needy all the time, draining. And so your attitude totally shifts from empathy to total lack of empathy. Now, I need to add one thing. I have gone through burnout in my own life because I didn't apply what I'm going to teach tonight. I had to learn it the hard way. And what I realized is that burnout is the slow depletion of mental and physical resources. Slow. And what I mean by that is it happens so slowly that you don't even realize you're burning out until it's too late, until you are burned out. And so I hope to give you some help in doing this. So here's a test that is used quite widely. It's a burnout test. 15 questions. So we're going to go through it. So you go like this. If it's not true of you at all, put a 1. If it's rarely true, a 2. Sometimes true, a 3. Often, a 4. Very often, a 5. Okay? So here are the 15. I feel run down and drained of physical or emotional energy. 1 to 5. Number 2, I have negative thoughts about my job. 3, I am harder and less sympathetic with people than perhaps they deserve. 4, I am easily irritated by small problems or by my coworkers and team. So emphasis, easily irritated. 5, I feel misunderstood or unappreciated by my coworkers. 6, I feel that I have no one to talk to. 7, I feel that I am achieving less than I should. 8, I feel under an unpleasant level of pressure to succeed. 9, I feel I am not getting what I want out of my job. 10, I feel that I'm in the wrong organization or the wrong profession. 11, I am frustrated with parts of my job. 12, I feel that organizational politics or bureaucracy frustrate my ability to do a good job. 13, I feel that there's more work to do than I practically have the ability to do. 14, I feel that I do not have time to do many of the things that are important to doing a good quality job. And 15, I find that I do not have time to plan as much as I would like to. Okay, so here's what you do. Add up your score, and no matter what your score, just make special note of any that you put 5 beside. But then add up your score. If it's between 15 and 18, no signs of burnout. 19 to 32, a little sign of burnout. 33 to 49, at risk of burnout. 50 to 59, severe risk of burnout. And 60 to 75, very severe risk of burnout. So how did you do? It might be a little bit of a shock once you begin to see your score. So let me just take all of this compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, and break it down into the symptoms. So when we work with people with trauma, we talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD is certain symptoms, characteristics. So secondary traumatic stress also has PTSD-like symptoms, okay? So, a couple things to be aware of. If you are working with other people with trauma, but you have your own trauma from your past, working with them in their trauma, you might find it triggers your trauma. So you might start having flashbacks. You might find yourself getting triggered more often. So be very aware of that. Secondly, PTSD is all about hyperarousal. So it's like somebody comes behind you and touches you on the shoulder, and you just go crazy, hyperarousal. And that means also you go from 0 to 100 in a nanosecond. So that is a characteristic of complex trauma, PTSD. So if you find yourself starting to be more hyperaroused, reacting more quickly, then that's dangerous. That's something to pay attention to. The other part about PTSD is you avoid anything that you think might be dangerous, anything that would be demanding, difficult. So now you find yourself avoiding more, another danger sign. Okay, now break it down into specifics. If you find it harder and harder to listen to people, to be present when they're talking, to be emotionally available, if you find when people are talking, you just want to go blah, 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 shut up, I don't want to hear you anymore, and you don't want to open your heart to them, you just want to hear them academically, and that's the end of it, that's a sign, potentially, that you've got some secondary traumatic stress. Another thing is that you have an inability to embrace complexity. So now all of a sudden, all you want is everything to be simple, black and white. Don't give me anything complicated. I don't want to try to deal with complicated stuff. For some, they start to have changes in their memory and perception. So now you're forgetting things. Or you're starting to get flashbacks. Or your perception, it's now quite distorted, and every once in a while you realize it's distorted. Some just get this tunnel vision when they're in the traumatic stress, secondary traumatic stress, and they don't see the big picture anymore. They just see the problem, but they don't see beyond that to other issues. And so their whole perception is not great. And then alterations in your sense of self-efficacy, which simply means you don't feel as confident as you used to in your job. You're now struggling to feel like you're even good at what you do, even though in the past you have lots of evidence that you're very good at what you do. Now there's disruptions in your perception of safety, trust, and independence. You're not sure who you can trust. That becomes something very much on your radar. And you're not feeling safe with people. And so all of a sudden, even though they might be safe people, you're not wanting to share with them. And so you begin to see others as untrustworthy, almost more like an enemy. That shift can happen when you're heading towards burnout. And then with that, hypervigilant. You're always looking now, watching carefully, scanning everybody, reading everybody's body language with greater interest, hypervigilance. Then you begin to avoid clients. You see a client coming and you want to duck out so you don't have to say hi to them because you're afraid if you say hi to them, they might want to talk. And then you avoid responsibilities. You just procrastinate. You just don't have the energy to do the stuff you normally would do. And then you use your free time not to do what you should be doing, but to involve yourself in mindless distractions, playing a game on your computer for hours, watching mindless TV, reorganizing your kitchen, over and over. All of those things now kick in. You still have some energy, but you don't want to put it into caring for people, fulfilling responsibilities. You just want something mindless. Now there's a greater anger closer to the surface, which makes you more irritable. But also you find yourself becoming more cynical. You predict negative outcomes more quickly in circumstances and in talking with clients. And you feel sometimes a hopelessness to ever dig yourself out of all of the stress and all of the things that are on your shoulders as responsibilities. It just starts to feel too much, and you just feel like you're starting to drown, and you feel hopeless. That can result in increased sleeplessness. You can't turn your brain off. Or increases in anxiety. You're getting panic attacks. You're having lots more anxiety whenever you think of going into a social setting or even to work. Fear is growing again inside of you. And then you can't sleep, but you're tired all the time. Chronic exhaustion, chronic fatigue is there. That can result in physical ailments. You now have joint pain, muscle pain, headaches, tightness in your chest, sore stomach, irritable bowel. All of those things can begin to happen. But you tend to minimize problems. Somebody comes with you a problem, and instead of looking at it accurately and dealing with it, you go, oh, it's not a big deal. And it's not because it's not a big deal. It's just because you don't want to deal with it. And your kids come to you with problems, and you, just get over it. Because you don't have the energy to deal with it. And then underneath that, though, you feel a lot of guilt. You know you're not doing well. You know you're avoiding clients. You know you're not present when they're sharing with you. And so you're feeling some guilt. And then another characteristic is you start to lose your imagination about the future. You lose your ability to dream and plan and think about kind of possibilities of where your life is heading and what it might do. That's gone. And you begin to have fewer and fewer happy moments in your life. Overall dissatisfaction settles in with everything. Your job, home. You can't even watch what would normally be enjoyable TV without feeling discontent. And then you begin doubting what you believe, what you stand for, who you are, your gifts, your abilities, your future. It's an awful existence. So those are the characteristics of this secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue. If you've got some of those, if you got a lot of those, I hope you're going, okay, what's going on here? So before I get to the solution, let me just add this, the complex trauma piece. Do you realize that for many people, they can be in a high stress environment working with people with trauma and they never burn out? Whereas others can be in that environment and they'll burn out. So what's the difference? Why does one person do well in that environment and are able to sustain working in that environment and others can't? And in many cases, there's a complex trauma explanation. So people from complex trauma are naturally drawn to help other people who have complex trauma. But what they don't realize is that their own complex trauma has shaped in them ways of coping that will set them up to fail in this new environment and burn out. So what are those complex trauma features that set you up to burn out in helping others? So number one, shame. So shame basically is, I don't have good feelings for myself. I don't feel good enough. And so I need others to like me. And so they become people pleasers. They don't say no very well. If they say no or set a boundary, they feel guilty. If somebody wants help and they just know they shouldn't be giving help, they should be taking care of themselves, they can't say no because they can't stand it if the other person's upset or angry at them. And so because of shame, they keep saying yes, yes, until they burn out. Or shame also says, I think I can solve my shame by having people need me all the time because then I feel important. And so they build counseling or therapist relationships where they create this the client becoming dependent on them. And it feels good for a while, but then they burn out. Another thing that comes out of complex trauma is not getting healthy validation. You either didn't get any validation or you got validated for the wrong things. And so for some people, they receive validation for helping others. And they were told they were such a good boy because they were helping others all the time. And so now that drives them because that's their source of validation. That's what makes them important. A third thing is people like complex trauma often are great in multitasking, chaotic situations with lots of drama because it gets their cortisol going, their adrenaline pumping, and they thrive. They feel alive in that environment. And so when they get into a world of helping people coming out of trauma, they've got drama happening all the time, and it triggers that desire for the drama and the chaos. And it gives them a rush. It gives them an energy that causes them to lose track of the fact that their gas tank is getting close to empty. And so they burn out. People from complex trauma usually have trouble setting healthy boundaries with others. People from complex trauma usually aren't good at accepting that they have limitations. They don't want to accept that they need 8 hours sleep. They want to be able to go on 4 hours sleep. And they want to think if they just push themselves, they can do it. And they can for a while, but they'll burn out. And so if you don't accept your limitations as a human being, then you are going to be very prone to burn out. People from complex trauma also have justice issues. They didn't have a lot of justice in their life growing up. And so now they're hypersensitive to injustice, not just in their own life, but when they're working with a client who's going through an unjust situation, that triggers them and they want to just take on that person's cause and go for justice for them. And pretty soon they're taking on everybody's cause and burning out. Another result of shame in a complex trauma person is they're very hard on themselves. They don't think they should fail. They think they should be perfect. And if they're not, they beat themselves up. They run themselves down. They're just hard on themselves. And then another thing that comes out of complex trauma is a lot of false guilt, where you feel guilty even though you didn't do anything wrong. And so if you say no to a person because of a very good reason, you feel guilt and you think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But that's a false guilt. But for many people, that false guilt will get them to take away the no and end up doing what they first said they wouldn't do. And then a number of people with complex trauma end up with control issues. And so they try to control, micromanage their client and tell them how to do every little part of their life in great detail, instead of giving the client the freedom to make decisions and to make mistakes. So another way to say this is complex trauma creates codependency, which is I need you, which is, I can't say no to you. I can't stand to have you angry at me. I need you to validate me. And when you have a therapist or a counselor with codependency, where they need the clients, where they need to be in a position to help the clients, where they can't say no to clients, those are the therapists that burn themselves out. So complex trauma creates major issues when it comes to setting up therapists to burn out. But I want you to understand there's also some cultural factors, and this can be kind of secular culture or religious culture. So Western culture for many years has emphasized a healthy work ethic. And what that has meant for some people is you work. You never relax, because to relax is to be lazy. And so you end up with a generation of workaholics. Those get into therapists and they burn themselves out because of that distortion around what a healthy work ethic is. Another thing that can happen in some parts of culture is that people are put on a pedestal for being hard workers or people who make great sacrifice. So they are involved in their community. They're having people into their home all their time. They're giving stuff away. They're spending evenings with people in emergency situations. They give. And those people are set up as the spiritual people, the people we should emulate. These are the heroes. And they are set up as this is the way you should be. And that can be distorted. And then for some in a religious environment, they're given the teaching that if you're tired, just trust God and He'll give you strength. And that is basically the magic fix for tiredness, is just trust God. They're not taught properly around self-care. They basically said, give, sacrifice, give. And when you start to get worn out and exhausted, just trust God. And then in some cultures, religious, secular, there's a huge emphasis put on you don't arrive at being truly healthy unless you're helping the underprivileged. And if you're not helping the underprivileged, then you should feel guilty. You should feel that you're selfish. And so people go out thinking they have to help the not privileged part of society constantly, or else they're not healthy. And sadly, for many people, they can take parts of the Bible and twist it to support that kind of thinking. And so those can be some cultural things. Now, beyond that, let me add one other thing. There's some false beliefs that people can develop when it comes to parenting. So let me give you an example of two. In many homes, especially out of complex trauma, family basically is we've got your back. We will always be there for you. Loyalty is emphasized. But what that means is if you love your child, you will always be willing to make sacrifices for them no matter what, even if it takes away the consequences of the child's bad decisions. You don't want to have in that culture a tough love that says you got to live with the consequences. Tough love is not seen as love at all. Love is always give, even when you're doing things that take away the child's learning opportunities. And then with that, some parents say, if I love my child, I will do for them things they should be doing for themselves. I will do some of their responsibilities for them because they're just too tired today. And what you're training that child to be is to remain an immature, irresponsible person. because you don't require them to grow up and do what they need to do even when they don't feel like it. So some people coming out of certain family environments develop thinking around what love is that they then bring to the role as a therapist, and they carry that out with some of their clients who aren't really serious about changing, who continue to make bad decisions, and they invest and give and clean up after them and do for them what they should be doing for themselves, and they burn out. And I've seen that happen over and over again. So what do we do about it? I came across this quote. We have an obligation to our clients as well as to ourselves, our colleagues, and our loved ones, not to be damaged by the work we do. I just thought that was brilliant. And so bottom line is this. I cannot give if I don't keep filling my gas tank. So in order to give, I have to get to a certain degree. Not in an unhealthy way, but a healthy way. I have to learn to meet my needs so that my gas tank is full so that I can give to others. So self-care becomes so important. Now, there's been a lot of kind of bad teaching about self-care. And for some people, it's kind of the belief that you just sit around all day and indulge yourself and live an unhealthy life. When I talk about self-care, what I'm saying is I matter just as much as my clients. I have nothing to give to my clients unless I fill my gas tank. And I can only fill my gas tank if I meet my needs in a healthy way. And those are physical, emotional, relational, spiritual, and intellectual needs. And so I have to figure out how to care for myself so that I have something to give to the people that I work with. It is so important. So, what you're looking to do is to find a lifestyle that is sustainable, that enables you to continue to give in a sustainable way. So, I have to have just as much coming into my gas tank as is going out of my gas tank. That's the only way I can sustain this. So let me just say this. It takes a while to figure this out. Okay? So, number one, take time to remember who you are and what your needs are. So do an inventory of how am I doing? Where am I headed in life? What are the needs that I need to have met today? And so that for you, you might need to see your own counselor, your own therapist. But also it will include a certain kind of spiritual routine that you go through, practice, physical exercise, proper sleep, connecting with loved ones. All of those become critical ingredients in self-care. Connection with others, not just with clients, is so important, especially with some few healthy people in your life. That has a way of filling your gas tank more than anything else. But then you need some times of solitude, your own time, some private time, just to relax with nobody else that you have to be aware of. And for some people, they enjoy that time in nature. The beauty just helps them. I think it is so important as a therapist to keep in touch with me, how I'm doing. And so do an inventory every day of my emotions, of just how I am doing overall. That becomes absolutely essential. And then don't be afraid to ask for help. Part of what my role has become is so many people beginning and becoming therapists, counselors, they get stuck with certain clients, and thankfully they reach out and say, can you help me with this? There's no shame in that. We all need to consult others at times. So be willing to do that. Keep working on growing as a person so that you are growing emotionally, that you are learning more tools, that you are growing in relationships spiritually. All of that, keep growing as a person. Do things that you enjoy, things that you find fun. That is a big part of filling your gas tank. If you want to survive in this field, you have to become a pro at boundaries, healthy boundaries, and enforcing them. So essential. And in a couple of weeks, I'm going to talk about the difference between caregiving, which is healthy, and caretaking, which is unhealthy, where I do for you what you should be doing for yourself. So that's just an intro on caring for people who have addiction or trauma, the challenges of it, but the importance of learning how to survive well in this field of helping others. I hope it's giving you some helpful stuff. If you had that test and you are at that point of burnout, please seek out help, because you don't want to go into that burnout. It is not a good place to go. Okay, that's the end of part 1. I will be back in just a minute to go into the Christian part. If you're not interested in the Christian part, no problem. Thank you for being part 1, and we'll see you next week. Okay, welcome back. Last week we started looking at Peter, who is one of the 12 disciples that Jesus chose to follow him through his ministry of 3 years. And so we saw that Peter is someone who people with complex trauma can really relate with. And last week we kind of tried to get a sense out of the lies that had been part of his life. What made him tick were those lies, and how God helped him to confront that. Today I want to look at the very first encounters that Peter has with Jesus and what Jesus teaches him in those encounters. And I hope it just is very practical and very helpful for you. So Peter, we saw, was a fisherman with his brother, Andrew, and 2 friends, James and John. And so Jesus comes to them one day when they're fishing, and that's really what he calls them from. But we're given in Luke 5 this story of that encounter. And it says, one day as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. So there were so many people, and they wanted to get close enough to hear him. So they're all just kind of pushing closer and closer. And so it says he noticed 2 empty boats at the water's edge, for the fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. So they'd finished fishing for the day and were now cleaning their nets. So what he did was he'd step into a boat and kind of push out from shore. And basically that gave him some space from the crowd and would let him teach. That became one of the things that he did on a regular basis. So stepping into the boat, Jesus asked Peter, its owner, to push it out into the water. So he sat in the boat and he taught crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Peter, "Now you, Peter, go out where it is deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish." Kind of a weird thing at the end of teaching. And Peter goes, Master, we worked hard all last night and we didn't catch a thing. Now you have to understand that Peter was a professional fisherman. He was good at what he did. He knew that lake. He knew where the fish were. And they had just spent a night looking for fish everywhere and had not caught one fish. And now Jesus, this person who really isn't a fisherman at all, is giving him instructions on fishing. And it just sounds weird to him. It sounds like a dumb idea. Jesus saying, go and throw your nets out. They just had, and they hadn't caught a thing. But Peter says, if you say so, I'll go out and I'll let my nets down again. I think maybe inside he's going, this is a dumb idea, but I'll do what he says. And this time their nets were so full of fish that they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. Now that's a lot of fish. When Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus when he gets back to shore, and he says, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I am such a sinful man." For he was awestruck by the number of fish they had caught, as were the others with him. When the boat was overflowing and the second boat was overflowing, he realized, who is this man? And he was overwhelmed with a sense, I am in the presence of greatness I have never encountered before. So that's the event. Now let me kind of get the lessons from it that I think Jesus wanted Peter to learn. Number one, Peter, the first priority you must learn in following me is obedience. Fruitfulness or success is based on not just hard work, but it's based on obeying me, which means trusting me. So Peter, I am going to get you and ask you to do things at times that to you might seem foolish, stupid, but if you will obey me, you will trust me, you'll be successful. You will have fruit. So Peter, instead of trusting your smarts and everything, you have to learn to trust my smarts, even when it contradicts some of your smarts. So obedience is the first ingredient to being successful in serving me. You have to understand how hard this would have been for Peter. Because Peter was a leader. Peter was a successful businessman. Peter had a house. He had a wife. He had boats. He had a business. Because he was smart. He knew about fish. And now his brains had been put beside Jesus' brain. And he realized how smart Jesus was. He was in another league. But it would still be hard at times to trust Jesus' brain. So that's why I think there had to be this sensational catch made. If Peter had just gone out and Jesus said, throw your net out into the deep water, and he had only caught 2 or 3 fish, he might have said, oh, well, that was luck. But when he caught 2 boats overflowing with fish, he went, okay, this is a brain greater than anything of this world. And it overwhelmed him with, this is the person who knows. This is the person in a different league. And he needed that right up front so that he would begin to realize he wasn't the smartest person in the room. The second thing, Jesus was now going to ask Peter to leave his fishing business and follow him. Jesus didn't offer him a salary or a wage. And so he was going to step away from a successful business where he still had a house, he had a wife and mother-in-law to feed, he had other bills, and now he's going to follow Jesus without a salary. Whoa, that was a big step. And so what Jesus is showing Peter on that very important time is, Peter, if I call you to do something, I will provide. I am very capable of providing. And that is an important thing we all need to learn as we serve God. But Peter, I think, really had to see his own weakness, his own limitations, his own humanness. Because as we saw last week, Peter kind of thought he was a bit smarter than everybody, a bit better than everybody, a bit more capable than everybody. And he had to have failed fishing. And then seen what Jesus did in providing this huge catch of fish to really see, wow, I'm so weak compared to him. I don't have the kind of knowledge to be successful every fishing trip, but he does. And Peter's main flaw, which we're going to see over and over again, is he keeps sliding back into thinking he's better than everybody. He keeps sliding back to this default setting which says, I don't have the limitations of other people. And so Peter was going to have some very serious failures until he finally got to a point where he realized, yes, God gave me with good brains. God gave me leadership skills, business skills, but I need him badly. I need his guidance. I need his working in my life and through my life because I am so weak. I am so vulnerable. And that is what we all need to learn so badly. That's true humility. So here's this guy, Peter, starting out following Jesus. And Jesus is saying, Peter, if you want to be successful in following me, well, you have to learn a few things. You got to learn to obey me, even when it seems foolish. You have to learn that I will provide. So you don't need to be worrying. And you have to learn that you're weak and that you need me and you need my guidance and you need me to run the show. Those become very important lessons for all of us. Let's pray. Father, thank you again for this story of Peter. Lord, those lessons sound simple, but how hard it is to learn to trust your wisdom over ours, to learn to obey you in every situation, to learn how weak and small we are and accept that and trust you as we work on ourselves. And so I just again pray that you would encourage people, but give clarity as they think through the directions and steps that they need to go in their life. Amen. Well, thank you again for being part of our time here on this Friday. Again, I just hope that it's an encouragement to you. It's a source of learning, of getting tools, of getting the help that you need. We'll see you next week.